The source of all life for the villages of Provence, Cotignac has an abundant supply. The waters of La Cassole have changed their course many times over the centuries past. They've witnessed the rise and fall of emperors and kings. They've watched the passing of tyranny and revolution, the ebb and flow of men's fortunes. In the summer months, the population of the village swells from just 2,000 souls to more than 6,000. Crowds of tourists pack the stalls of the Tuesday market in the main square, seeking out the flavours and products that form the basis of Provençal cuisine. The tastes and aromas of summer in the south of France. One corner of the Cours Gambetta, though, has remained empty for the last 15 years. But change is now coming to the Hotel Le Calais. In its heyday, it attracted the rich and famous, earning Cotignac the title of the Saint-Tropez of the High Var. It was run by Huguette Carène. She has a treasure trove of memories in her library of photograph albums. Madame de Gaulle was just one of the celebrities who found sanctuary within the walls of the Le Calais. Brigitte Bardot also chose the hotel to escape the pressure of constant exposure to the press and public on the Côte d'Azur. And the singer Joe Dassin, who was topping the French charts in the 70s, picked Cotignac and the Le Calais to celebrate his second marriage. Huguette christened the hotel the Le Calais after buying it from the Sisters of Saint Vincent de Paul, who used it as a holiday home for the orphans in their care. The deal struck was, to say the least, unconventional.
On était toutes les deux accoudées à la balustrade, on regardait vers Notre-Dame des Grâces et elle me dit « Mais vous vous rendez compte qu'il y a 20 ans que j'ai mis cette maison à la vente ?» Je dis « Bah oui ma mère, mais c'est trop cher. » Elle me dit « Comment c'est trop cher ?» J'ai dit « Oui, c'est trop cher, vous la vendrez jamais. » Elle me demande alors « Combien en donneriez-vous ?» Moi je dis « La moitié. » Eh ben je vous la vends.
The first meal ever cooked in the hotel was for the Mother Superior and other sisters in the order.
Elles sont venues et ce sont des personnes qui mangeaient très peu, qui n'avaient pas l'habitude d'avoir des repas et le chef les avait vraiment gâtées. Et elles étaient toutes malades. Elles ont fini leur repas dans le jardin en arrosant toutes les plantes.
Huguette will be publishing a cookbook of the traditional Provençal recipes that were the speciality of the Le Calais. She's calling it Dishes That Sing and Tell Tales. So she was delighted to hear the hotel is now in the hands of a new owner who plans to reopen it as a school for cooking.
Et de savoir que ces personnes ont eu cette idée géniale de faire une école de cuisine, alors ça c'est vraiment formidable. Je trouve que c'est la meilleure idée qu'on ait pu avoir pour cet établissement qui est quand même merveilleux. C'est un endroit merveilleux.
Originally constructed in the year 1802, Europe then was enjoying a rare moment of peace, but Napoleon was already planning for an invasion of England. The new owner's plans are not quite that ambitious.
I think I have another one somewhere too. No, I think it may...
The man with that plan is a Canadian entrepreneur called Graham Porter. He runs a shipping business in Hong Kong and has built a home in Cotignac for his wife Wendy and their two boys.
Right? I think this pipe...
So why has a man with a worldwide business decided to invest his time and money in Cotignac?
There might be another basin below, There might be a basin in here. I think it's the quality of some of the relationships you have here with people. Things that you don't get necessarily in a place like Hong Kong or New York. You get to meet a broad group of very interesting people that have time to relate with you more. It's been a wonderful place for our children to have time as well. I think Cotignac in particular has been very welcoming to our family. And this relates to Madame Blanc at the local school taking our children in and making them feel that they were welcome at the school. Was really important for us. We wanted to then give something back to the village. So it's a circle. A little bit of what I'm doing here is also because of a feeling that we decided to put roots down here a little bit. Our home will always be Vancouver, Canada. It's where Wendy and I both grew up. but this is where our heart is.
Artists and craftsmen have long been attracted to Cotignac. Many came to the rocks above the village and restored houses that had been abandoned. Armand Avril supports the new plans in the making. Art critics have described him as a brilliant juggler of space and form. He began to make collages out of any scrap material at hand. His work often reflects the treasured sunlight of Provence.
Je suis venu à Cotignac en 1962 parce qu'en 60, j'ai rencontré à Dakar Jean Arène, un peintre de la région de Cotignac, quoi. Il a aimé mon travail, moi j'ai aimé le sien, puis il m'a dit quand tu rentres en France, tu viens nous voir à Cotignac.
Avril's early compositions drew on the work of Braque, of Picasso and Matisse, but evolved from his own unique artistic intelligence and a passion for African art. He's a man of few words, but a look inside his front room gives you a glimpse of his singular imagination. An art critic described him as a man living on the edge of society, a man inspired by his experience as a craftsman, a solitary soul. During the Second World War, he worked as a shepherd, a job that gave him a lot of time for the silent contemplation of light and colour. Richard Artaud is a close friend of Avril. He used to run a bar and restaurant in the Cours Gambetta and welcomes the coming changes.
Et là, depuis donc 15 ans, ce lieu est pratiquement mort. Et donc, nous, on voit arriver ces projets comme, avec beaucoup de chaleur et d'enthousiasme et d'espoir, parce que non seulement ça va faire revivre ce lieu, mais d'après ce qu'on en sait, ça risque de faire revivre ce lieu à l'année, quoi. Même l'hiver, quoi, il y aura du monde. Donc ça, c'est quand même fabuleux, bravo, quoi.
Richard remembers the 60s and the 70s as being a very different era for Cotignac.
Dans les années 70, un des Monty Python, Eric Idle, qui a acheté une propriété au village et qui, lui, a fait venir vraiment des gens exceptionnels du style les Stones, on avait Paul Simon, on a eu plein de gens comme ça, Charlotte Rampling sur la terrasse, David Bowie qui venait au comptoir, et tout ça, ça se passait dans une discrétion absolue. C'est pour ça qu'ils adoraient venir à Cotignac, ces gens-là. Robin Williams est venu à Cotignac, personne ne l'a su, quoi. On l'a su des années après, parce qu'il en a parlé lui-même à la télé française, quoi.
Nicolas Vallabreg is a renowned sculptor who has his studio in the hills above Cotignac. His works have been exhibited at the Pompidou Centre in Paris. He collects the wood and stone around his house and moulds them, playing with light, vibration and design to create an impression of movement. Each tree, he says, has its own story to tell. He remembers when his grandmother first took him to the village. There were horses and carts everywhere.
Il y a très bonne atmosphère à Cotignac. Bon, c'est un peu aussi, il ne faut pas penser que Cotignac est très particulier. Il est très particulier de par son exposition, parce que c'est un village qui est très beau, qui attire énormément de monde. Mais c'est un village qui, comme tous les villages un peu autour, sont très calmes à la saison d'hiver, à la saison d'automne. Il n'y a jamais eu de la part des Cotignacéens de rejet entre guillemets, de l'étranger. Les Cotignacéens ont toujours très bien accueilli les personnes qui venaient s'installer dans le village.
Workmen have been putting the finishing touches on another project of the Canadian businessman a few steps away from the Lucalen's front door. Just in the span of living memory, this building has housed a dance hall, a cinema, a restaurant and a garage. Now it's being turned into a cultural centre for the village, designed to be a hub for painting, for music and sculpture, as well as the audio-visual arts.
You can turn up. You know what? Maybe a little bit of muddy. Can you go to the gypsy?
It was known as the Chapel of the Holy Spirit when it started life in a century that was seeing a revolution in science. At the beginning of that decade, the French mathematician and philosopher René Descartes had just died. Isaac Newton was 7 years old. The Sun King in waiting was a boy of 13, and King Charles I had just lost his head in London. The building belonged to a brotherhood known as the Pénitents Blancs, the White Penitents, a movement of laymen, both men and women, who came together for prayer and devotions. They took care of the sick and helped to bury the poor. They spread throughout Provence and can still be found today.
Donc cette sorte d'aube blanche, dans le cas des pénitents blancs de Cotignac, avec cette cagoule qui fait disparaître la personne, impressionne beaucoup. Les pénitents sont des laïcs, chacun a donc sa place dans la société, les uns étant riches, d'autres étant beaucoup plus modestes. Certains, dans des confréries comme celle de Montpellier, sont issus de la haute noblesse et côtoient des gens issus du petit peuple. Et cette cagoule, cet habit, fait en fait disparaître la personne et marque que dans une confrérie de pénitents, il ne doit y avoir que des frères.
Some historians have contended that idea of égalité led to what they termed a gonflement démocratique, an explosion of democracy. Were they the spark that ignited the fire of the French Revolution?
Les voyageurs avaient remarqué au XVIIIe siècle, avec M. de Saussure qui était un Suisse et Arthur Young, un Anglais, qui disait qu'il fallait aborder le paysan provençal avec un air d'égalité et de franchise, qui ne sente ni la hauteur ni la politesse affectée. La hauteur le révolte et l'affectation au contraire et l'affection au contraire lui inspire de la défiance.
Régis can trace his family tree in Cotignac back to 1527. He says his family were prosperous peasants who owned their own land and were masters of their own fate.
Encore un peu plus tôt, l'intendant de Provence, Ledré, en 1697, avait noté que très souvent des gens de conditions modestes ne se découvraient pas devant leurs supérieurs, donc n'enlevaient pas leur chapeau pour ne pas avoir le sentiment de s'abaisser. Voilà.
Unlike many other villages in Provence, Cotignac never suffered serious losses from the plagues and droughts that ravaged the surrounding region. The community was literally blessed. A peasant working in the fields above the village in the summer of 1519 saw a vision of the Virgin Mary. She told him to tell the people of Cotignac to build a church on the site and call it Notre-Dame de Grâce. A century passed and the French monarchy was in crisis. After 22 years of marriage, King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria had failed to provide an heir to the throne. The Virgin Mary appeared once again in a vision to a friar and told him prayers should be recited at 3 churches, including her own above Cotignac. Within a year, the boy who was to become the Sun King was born and the throne of France was secure. Louis XIV came to the church with his mother in 1660 to give thanks. Ascending a grand staircase, the villagers had to borrow money to build. Just 4 months later, though, they were rewarded with another miracle on the slopes of Montbéliard. This time St. Joseph appeared to a thirsty young shepherd and showed him a stone under which was a hidden spring of water. At the site, the convent of Saint Joseph was built. To this day, it's a place of pilgrimage and worship like Notre-Dame de Grâce. Between them, they attract more than 50,000 pilgrims a year from all over the world. But as the end of the 18th century approached, turbulent times lay ahead for the people of Cotignac and the whole of France. The political convulsion of the French Revolution led to Notre-Dame de Grâce being turned into a prison during Robespierre's reign of terror. 200 suspects awaiting trial there were saved from the guillotine when Robespierre himself suffered the same fate he had inflicted on 17,000 enemies of the revolution. No form of divine intervention, though, could save Notre-Dame de Grâce itself. The whole building was demolished by revolutionaries. It was not until 1811 it rose again on Montverdaille. Cotignac's mayor has been equally delighted to see new life rising again on the course Gambetta.
Être une vitrine pour le village parce que M. Porter a doté ce bâtiment de moyens et d'équipements superbes en conservant un caractère authentique. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est la partie de l'étage où il est prévu de faire des expositions internationales, également de louer peut-être cette salle pour des manifestations de tout genre. Je pense que Cotignac étant un lieu important et très visité aujourd'hui, permettra encore, cette réalisation permettra encore de nous faire mieux connaître. Nous sommes déjà connus à l'échelon international, mais ça ira dans une très bonne direction.
Before its modern-day reincarnation, the Chapel of the Holy Spirit changed yet again both its role and its name. It was known as the Casino. René Vaca played a clarinet on his terrace. Each week after a movie was shown, they cleared the decks for a dance. Everyone in the village used to come. He didn't get paid for it, he did it just for the fun of it. And it wasn't the only fun to be had.
Voilà, et toutes les années, c'était comme ça. Alors petit à petit, bien entendu, que les jeunes, sachant que toutes les années, il venait des filles, ben, ils attendaient qu'elles arrivent. Par derrière le Calin, il y a une rivière qui passe, qui s'appelle la Cassole, et là-bas, il y a des jardins et tout, et par derrière, on pouvait monter, escalader le mur et aller rencontrer les filles.
René's wife, Maurice, remembers how friends at the time used to be invited round for an aperitif of a good Grenache rosé. But when they tried to leave for their dinner, they couldn't get up. It was a Grenache that cut the legs. Her mother-in-law told her that before World War I, Cotignac was really cut in two between the so-called whites and reds. The whites were religious, practicing Catholics from the more bourgeois families, and the reds were socialists who wanted their voices to be heard. It may be due to the special effects of that Grenache rosé. The divide is now healed.
Je me souviens très bien qu'au bal du casino, ces messieurs n'invitaient pas n'importe qui. On invitait plutôt, allez, les rouges invitaient plutôt des demoiselles rouges et les blancs invitaient plutôt de leur côté aussi. Mais vous savez, l'amour est aveugle et puis aussi sourd. Hein. Les parents avaient beau dire c'est un rouge et c'est un blanc, à un moment donné, les mariages se faisaient quand même.
Maurice Boeuf was a projectionist at the Casino Cinema. He said they had up to 80 people attending the screenings over the weekends.
On passait des films, toutes sortes de films. Hein. Et je vous dis, on les passait assez récemment parce que le patron était de Marseille. Et il avait les films assez rapidement. Ça fait qu'on avait de bonnes productions.
The cinema was a welcome diversion for the women who worked in the silk industry in Cotignac. Many mulberry trees can still be seen scattered round the village. Their leaves were used to feed the silkworms. It was the main industry here for more than a century and a half.
On faisait d'abord les verres à soie, comme ça après. On portait les cocons au Grenache, dans la rue, dans la grande rue, dans une ferrage. Je ne sais pas comment ça s'appelle ça, le ferrage. Dans une ferrage de la 3e, je crois que c'est la 3e. Et on portait et on nous payait. Dans le kilo de cocon, voilà. Ça, je me rappelle, avoir tiré la soie, on moulait le cocon, on le dividait. Quand on a trouvé le bon bout, il se divide tout le cocon. voyez, et on me faisait des pelotes de soie.
The work was not easy, so a trip to the cinema was a welcome break, even though the first films were black and white and silent.
Il y avait des films je pleurais chaque fois. C'était joli. Je ne me rappelle plus les titres par contre. Mais c'était vraiment... Non, c'était pathétique, c'était bien. Moi, j'aimais bien. C'était plus poignant que ces films qu'on passe maintenant vite, 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 là. Hein. On vivait davantage.
Et même à l'époque, ils coupaient le courant à minuit pile. Et je me rappelle toujours n'avoir pas pu voir la fin d'un film que j'aimais beaucoup. Et j'ai jamais connu la fin. Je ne me rappelle plus lequel c'était maintenant. Mais j'ai jamais vu la fin de ce film. Il me plaisait beaucoup. Oh, j'avais une colère de voir qu'on avait coupé le courant.
But as the 20th century advanced, television came to Cotignac, and the chapel changed into a restaurant. It was started up by a friend of the man who helps run the village's retirement home.
Il avait fait un restaurant qui marchait très très bien avec la terrasse qui est en train d'être reconstruite. Et il avait donné un style rétro à ce restaurant. Et je veux dire, il était très coté. Il y avait beaucoup de monde qui venait y manger. Et c'est lui qui l'a baptisé la falaise.
At the end of the 19th century, Cotignac had a population of around 3,500. But the average lifespan then for a man was just 27 years and 10 months. By 1960, the population had shrunk to around 1,500 people. The industries that had made the village so prosperous had died out. Families were leaving the countryside to find work in the big cities. But wine and tourism are leading a renaissance. Today, the basement of La Falaise hosts a thriving business selling award-winning blends of rosé. Originally, the chapel used to store its wine here, but in the 19th century it was part of the leather industry in Cotignac, housing a factory known as the Tannerie de Long. Jeannie Cronk is not only helping her husband Stephen keep the wine flowing, she's also driving forward the Canadian entrepreneur's plans to transform this part of the Corse Gambetta.
I mean, what's attracted us to Cotignac was that it's a lively place. You know, we felt that there were quite a lot of towns in the area where we had, you know, where the seasonality is even much stronger than here, where in the summer there are lots of people. And in winter, it completely goes to sleep. And Cotignac is great because there's, you know, a lot of interesting people you wouldn't expect.
It's wonderful. You can sense the history in the walls. I mean, for a start, the climate is very different. As soon as you walk in the door, it's really cool. I mean, these walls are 2 meters thick. I mean, it's a solid building, and it's just so nice to have brought it back to being a place of great wine again. So.
It's the summer months when the sales of rosé usually peak, but in case you can't remember why you like it so much, Stephen has the perfect description.
Real fresh acidity, lovely red fruits, but with hints of grapefruit too. So you've got that lovely citrus element, which gives it an element of complexity. But we also managed to get this minerality, which gives the wine a sense of seriousness. It's not just a frivolous wine for having when you're on the beach. This is a proper, serious gastronomic wine, but it's not an intellectual wine. It's a wine to be enjoyed by itself or with food.
It was an officer serving in the Roman legions of Emperor Trajan who is thought to have bequeathed his name to the village. Known as Cotignac, he built a villa and a farm above Le Rocher in the year 100 AD. History does not record whether he too was partial to the odd glass of rosé. No matter what the future brings to Cotignac, its heart will always remain the same, a classic picture of a Provençal village. The Corse Gambetta is a natural amphitheatre pinned beneath Le Rocher and the gaze of the Saracen towers. It's a village whose people are proud to describe it as one of the most charming in France.